Welcome to IT Simplified. In today's session, we are going to discuss cost optimization for your Azure BCDR strategy. So let's get started. Like always, if you're liking these sessions, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this content. There is always a tug of war going on between the budget and the IT department. Whenever there is an economic downturn, IT sector is the first one to get hit. That's why able to differentiate between the organization needs and want is critical for any IT implementation. And having a right backup and disaster recovery strategy is no different. Now, for certain organization, the way you want to design it is based on their requirement. Maybe for this company, a 2 to 3 hours of downtime is okay. And in certain scenario, every minute counts. They want to have their operation running 24/7. So in both these scenarios, what approach you will take will be different. We have come across scenarios in which the customer has wanted the best available architecture and then to be rejected because it's too expensive. And that's why, as I said again, it's very important to know about what the customer's actual needs are, and based on that, you can design that. Let me know if you come across a scenario in the comment section in which you have given the architecture and then they have come back saying that they don't want and they want to trim it down. Now, coming back to the Azure BCDR solution, there are two components from which your cost is going to come into play. And talking about Azure Backup Services, it will be the Azure Protected Instance and the storage it's going to consume in the backend. So the Protected Instance storage can be categorized into three tiers: 0 to 50 gig, 51 to 500, and anything above 500 gig. And the cost can be 5, 10, and 20 gig US dollar for each protected instance. And then for the backend storage where your backups is going to reside, the cost will depend upon what redundancy you pick. There are three options. You can pick from locally redundant, zone redundant, or geo-redundant. Locally redundant will keep the data within one region. A zone redundant will give you a little bit high redundancy in which your data will be segregated across multiple data center but still within one region. And then you have a geo-redundant storage in which your data will be replicated between two regions which will be paired. And there's actually a fourth option now as part of the CRR or cross-region restore, which is read access geo-redundant storage. And again, as I said, which option you choose will totally depend upon what SLAs that customer wants. So let me show you on the pricing calculator where you can find these different cost components. All right, so I'm logged into the pricing calculator page, which you can Google search. And if you can see, I've added the Azure Backup component. Now you're going to pick the region where you're going to deploy this service. And depending upon the workloads, you can choose from different types. In this example, we are talking about Azure VM. The first component, as I said, will come from the protected instance. And there are three tiers. You have 0 to 50 gig, for which you're going to pay $5. Then you have 51 to 500 gig, which is $10, and anything above 500 gig will be increment of 500 gig. So if I change, let's say for 501, the cost will be $20. And that's how you can calculate this component price. And then you also have the backup policy, like how often you want to back that up. That will also translate into how much is the consumption on the storage side. But the other component that I want to talk about is the backup storage data, because you need to save those backup sets, and these are the four options that you can choose from. As I mentioned, locally redundant, geo-redundant, read access geo-redundant, as well as zone redundant. So if I pick geo-redundant, the cost is corresponding over here. And you can see the cost total at the bottom. You can always change the currency based on your geography. There's also something I want to point out here is that by default, when you create a recovery service vault, Azure is going to pick a standard tier for your repository for your backup sets. If you want, you can also move your recovery points into archival tier. That's also a great way of saving the money in the long run. And I'll show you that onto the Azure portal where you can configure that. But again, going back to our cost optimization, that's where your two cost is going to come from. Your Azure Backup Protected instance and what redundancy you want to pick for your storage. Now with this, let me move to the Azure portal and show you where you can configure this policy. So I'm logged into the Azure portal with my admin credential. And for the sake of this video, I've already created a recovery service vault. I'm going to pick IMRSV for this demonstration. The first thing I want to show you is under settings, if I go to the properties, and when you create this recovery service vault, by default, the redundancy for your backup sets will be geo-redundant, which is the case in mine. If you want, you can always change it to locally redundant or zone redundant, but this needs to be changed before you run any backup jobs. Now in this case, you can see it's already grayed out because I've already used. And for my company, geo-redundant storage is okay because I want to keep the data between two regions. You can also see that there is a cross-region restore option, and right now it is disabled. I can always enable this. And when I enable this, the storage that is going to use in the backend is read access geo-redundant storage. And if you have noticed on the pricing calculator, that option or the cost for that was not available. But if you go and check into the details of Azure Backup Costing, you will see there is a separate cost for read access geo-redundant storage. And it's a great case scenario in which you want to test your backup sets. Because if you pick, let's say, for example, a geo-redundant storage and you have not enabled cross-region restore, you have to wait till Microsoft gives a green signal and say that your primary region is not in running state, and then you'll be able to access your data into the paired region. But with cross-region restore, that shortcoming is not there. That data will be always available, and that's why it is called read access geo-redundant storage. So it's very important that you know what are the difference between these three options, because it's going to have a cost associated with this based on what option you pick. Now, other thing I want to show you is under manage, if you go to the backup policy, how often you want to back up, it's going to have cost implications too, right? So let's pick the policy type, in this case, my VM, and you see you have two options. You have the standard policy and you have the enhanced policy. In standard, your data will be backed up once a day, and you can also pick how many recovery points you want. Whereas in enhanced option, you can back up the data every 4 hours. So it means that you're consuming more storage. And also you can see how long you want to keep your snapshots. That's also going to have the cost implications. By default it is 7, but you can always change it. The maximum you can go is 11 in this case. And then as part of the policy, how long you want to keep this data, right? You have this option of keeping it weekly, retention monthly, as well as yearly backup points. And then you can also enable tiering. As I mentioned, when you create a recovery service vault, by default, it's going to be in a standard tier. But with tiering enabled, you can move your recovery points into an archival tier, which has almost 1/10 the cost of your regular standard tier. And it's a great way of keeping your costs down. So if you're in that kind of scenario, you can always enable tiering and move your recovery points. But just want to point out one thing, that in case you want to use those recovery points, that needs to be moved from archival tier into a standard tier, and then there is going to be a regular egress charges, which is going to be there, and you can check that on from the pricing calculator too. But these are some of the options you can choose in Azure Backup Services, again based on the customer SLAs, and then you can implement that and you can also use this for cost optimization. Hopefully you found this useful. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.